All right, so today we're digging into a really fascinating, kind of radical theory from our source material. It asks this one startling question. What if the Roman Empire never actually fell? What if it just packed up and moved? This quote from Orwell, it just sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it? The whole idea here is, what if a massive piece of our history wasn't just lost to time, but was actually deliberately hidden? The source material we're looking at today argues that's exactly what went down. I mean, that's a pretty wild question to ask. The story we all learn in school is that Rome collapsed, all its knowledge vanished, and boom, Europe plunged into the Dark Ages. But this theory we're exploring, it suggests we might need to rethink that entire story. And that gets us to the absolute core of this thing, the Rome Relocation Thesis. The argument is that when Rome was staring down the barrel of collapse, it didn't die, no. Instead, it pulled off the most audacious, most unbelievable strategic withdrawal in all of history by moving its entire operation across the Atlantic. So how on earth could an entire empire just vanish? Well, the source material kicks things off by reframing the fall of Rome. It says we shouldn't see it as a military defeat, but as a deliberate disappearance. A massive historical mystery with a trail of forensic clues left behind. This line from the source really captures the scale of the puzzle we're looking at. The author is basically saying, look, the evidence for a complete chaotic collapse, it just isn't really there. Instead, they see signs of a very organized withdrawal that left this huge power vacuum back in Europe. So to solve this historical whodunit, the source material lays out four main lines of proof. Think of it as a forensic trail. And we're going to follow that trail, starting with the most tangible clues of all. Maps. Maps that, according to the author, have no business existing. Okay, let's talk about these maps. According to the source, if you look at old colonial-era maps of the Americas, they're holding secrets in plain sight. They show this incredibly detailed knowledge that was supposedly chronologically impossible for Spanish explorers to have at that time. So here's the first major paradox the source points out. Logically, the Spanish showed up on the Atlantic coast, right? So you'd expect to see all the development starting there and spreading west. But these early maps, they show the complete opposite. The most detailed, sophisticated infrastructure is way over on the Pacific coast, thousands of miles from where they even started. It just doesn't make sense. And according to the source, the timeline is just impossible. The Spanish first laid eyes on the Pacific in 1513. Yet, just a little over 100 years later, you have maps showing this comprehensive knowledge of the entire coastline. We're talking details that should have taken generations of painstaking, systematic exploration to figure out. The numbers just don't add up. Okay, so if the geography on the maps is suspect, what about the language? This is where it gets really interesting. The source argues we can actually date these maps through a kind of linguistic archaeology because the words written on them tell a story that seems to completely contradict a 16th century origin. Let's zoom in on this one detail, found on a map of Western Mexico. It says, Argenti fodinae. That translates to silver mines. Now, you might think, okay, a simple Latin label, what's the big deal? But the source says that specific word choice, that's the real clue. And here is the absolute kicker from the source. Fodinae wasn't just some generic Latin word for mine. It was a precise, technical, legal term from Imperial Rome for a state-controlled mining operation. And by the 16th century, that word was 1,000 years out of date. A Spanish cartographer would have just written minas. Using fodinae would be like us writing an official document today and using a word from Chaucer. It just wouldn't happen. So this all leads to what the source calls the three-language solution. These maps seem to show three layers of history. You've got a Roman administrative framework written in classical Latin, integrated with local indigenous names, and a complete and total absence of Spanish. The author argues this is basically a snapshot of a pre-existing Roman indigenous society that the Spanish just stumbled upon and then took credit for. Which, of course, brings us to the giant elephant in the room. If any of this is even remotely true, why isn't it in every history book on the planet? Well, the source material spends a lot of time on what it calls the most successful and widespread cover-up in human history. The theory goes that the evidence wasn't actually destroyed, it was just rebranded. Pre-existing Roman maps and surveys were allegedly redated. Their discoveries were reattributed to famous Spanish explorers. And just like that, you've effectively pasted a new history right on top of an older one. Now, the source material points a finger directly at the Vatican as being central to this whole operation. It claims that by classifying these pre-Columbian Roman documents under sneaky theological labels, the church could hold onto the knowledge internally while hiding its true origins from the rest of the world. And this alleged cover-up, according to the source, didn't stop there. It continued right into modern academia. By siloing the evidence, the maps are in the geography department, the Latin texts are with the classics folks. The full picture could never be put together by any single person. The puzzle pieces were kept in separate boxes. All right, so the final line of evidence the source presents is all about iconography. The argument here is that the symbols of this hidden Roman heritage never actually went away. They were just integrated into the art and the emblems of the New World, hiding in plain sight. And Exhibit A for this whole argument is the modern Mexican flag. Now, we typically see it as a powerful symbol of Aztec heritage, right? But the author argues that it's actually a blend of indigenous mythology living inside a hidden Roman framework. We all know the core Aztec story here, but the source says, hey, look closer. The eagle isn't killing the serpent, it's holding it. And that, the author suggests, is a huge difference. It doesn't symbolize conquest, but a synthesis of power, a union of two powerful traditions. Now, look at what's framing that entire indigenous scene. It's a wreath made of oak and laurel branches. And as the source is quick to point out, those are not plants from Mexico. They are purely 100% Roman symbols. Oak for civic virtue and laurel for military victory. The argument is that this isn't just a random decoration. It's a deliberate statement, an indigenous heart inside a Roman frame. This quote from the source really just captures the entire essence of this thesis. It reframes our whole view of history, not as a story of collapse and then rebirth, but one of constant adaptation and continuity, with old empires just re-emerging in new places, wearing new masks. And that really leaves us with a final, very provocative question to chew on. Obviously, the Rome Relocation Thesis challenges the very foundations of Western history. But, whether you find the evidence compelling or you think it's a total stretch, the source material forces us to ask a really important question. Are the histories we're taught the whole truth? Or are they just the authorized version of the story?